Hey guys, Brad Gilmore here. Want to give a big shout out to our title sponsor, Walker Texas Lawyer. If you or a loved one have been injured in an accident, whether that be a car, truck, motorcycle accident, or some kind of other issue, hit up Walker Texas Lawyer at 713-552-1117 or walkertexaslawyer.com.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now?
Broadcasting live from Houston, Texas, and around the world. TV host, best-selling author, and radio personality Brad Gilmore brings you a collection of conversations with stars from movies.
Matthew McConaughey.
Brad Gilmore.
Mark Wahlberg.
Hey, how are you?
The legendary Mr. Christopher Lloyd. Christopher, how are we doing?
I'm doing good. Great introduction.
Television.
Jimmy Fallon joins us this morning. Jimmy, how you doing, my friend?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Brad, for having me. I appreciate this, bud.
Kelly Ripa.
Brad, thank you for having me.
Comedy.
Jay Leno joins us. Jay, how you doing?
Hey, Brad, what's going on?
Chris Tucker is in the building. Chris Tucker, good morning to you.
Hey, Brad. Good morning to you. How are you?
Gabriel Fluffy Iglesias.
Good morning.
Music.
Lola Monroe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The legendary frontman of AC/DC, Brian Johnson, joins us right now. Brian, how you doing?
Good morning, Brad. What looking to talk to me funny, lad.
Grammy Award winner Maya joins us.
How are you?
And more. This is The Collection. Now your host, The Boat.
And look, I am so excited to have this man joining me on the show. He shares several passions with me, and one of them happens to be late night television. One man in particular, that man being David Letterman. He is the host of the Letterman podcast, and he's joining us right now. Mike Chisholm. Mike, how you doing?
Brad, it is so good to be here, and I just loved. I loved when you reached out to me because tangentially we actually have some connections. And the moment I saw the connection, the collection, and all the different things that you've done, I'm like, oh man, this guy and we can go long. I have a Back to the Future tattoo on my back. I just happen to have so there's that. In that tattoo, there's 21 things that I love so much. One of them being David Letterman's microphone. There's also a wrestling championship belt because I had a pro wrestling promotion up where I'm from, a charity one. And I became involved in a group called Cauliflower Alley in being in the wrestling business. A good friend of mine is Brittany Houghton. And I know exactly. There we go.
Brittany.
We go.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there we go. And we didn't even, you and I didn't even make that connection beforehand. So you guys we have lots of places we can go about lots of topics. But let me just put the cherry on top and say this, Brad. It is an honor to be here. I can't wait to just talk with you.
Well, first of all, Brittany, great person, top individual. Love Brittany. Gotten to know her over the several years. Now, what is the Back to the Future related tattoo? What do you have of? Is it DeLorean? Is it Flux Capacitor?
Yeah.
What do we got?
So the tattoo that I have on my back, and it kind of it starts in like the left hand side of the back. It's a ghost trap from Ghostbusters, and it's opening up. And there's the big stream of light coming out. And in that tattoo, there's 21 things that I just have loved my whole life. So it's kind of a collage, and it's all being sucked into or let out of the trap, depending on your point of view. One of the things that's coming out is the DeLorean with the fire trail behind it. That's involved in the tattoo, and the lights of the trap and the fire are all that's all part of it. So that's what the Back to the Future reference is in the tattoo.
So, okay, given Ghostbusters, pro wrestling, and Back to the Future, you're definitely coming of age in the 80s, if I had to make a assertion of that. Am I correct?
Very, very proud Gen X kid. And when I say proud, I'm talking the music, and I'm talking all the music from the Flock of Seagulls to Nirvana, the Gen X music that defined us, and then the pop culture stuff that's there certainly are in the makeup of my DNA. And I'm still doing my very, very best to live my childhood, my inner child. I say I'm always operating at my optimal when the inner child has his grubby little hands around the steering wheel and is driving my life around. That's when I know I'm operating at exactly who I am authentically. So yes, very, very much so. I'm a 76 baby.
Okay. Yeah, that's when my brother was born. See, I'm technically, when I say technically, I mean definitionally a millennial.
Yep.
Right. But I feel as though everything that happened in the 80s just screams my name.
Yep.
whether that be 80s pro wrestling, whether that be Back to the Future, Ghostbusters. I'm a big Fletch fan. Are you a Fletch fan?
Oh yeah, you gotta love Fletch. You gotta love Fletch. I
Clue, of
still
course.
pine for the unmade Kevin Smith Fletch Lives movie that he was going to make. Very, very much so.
So we have all the same references. So it never surprises me that I tend to find these people online. Somehow we all get connected.
Yep.
And we have the same interests. But late night TV, I do want to jump into that because I want to get back to some wrestling because I think we'll save that for the end because I really would love to hear everything about your wrestling journey because you're born and raised where?
Kelowna, British Columbia. So as a reference, you got Seattle and Vancouver as kind of the two big cities on the West Coast, right? For the US and Canada. I'm about 3 hours east of Vancouver, 3.5 hour drive east of Vancouver. Vancouver and Seattle, though, those were the places I would go to concerts and things like that when I was a kid. Like I grew up I spent a lot of time in those two cities. So, and Kelowna happens to be, we're kind of like the Lake Tahoe of Canada. Four Seasons, world-class skiing, and world-class water skiing are all within a 40-minute drive from where I am. We have 80 golf courses in a 100-mile radius, wine country, a lot of wineries up here, things like that. And I just very, very Kelowna, British Columbia. If you look it up, it's a paradise. I'm so blessed to say that I'm born here and raised here. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, a good Canadian. And here's the other thing. Look, we're about to jump into the late night, I promise. But I've always had this theory that Canadians in general, the entire country, I know that's all segmented out, specifically Calgary, but Canadians and Texans, I think, are a lot alike as far as pro wrestling because the best pro wrestlers ever are either from Texas or Canada. Am I wrong here?
No, see, I was just when I was down at Cauliflower Alley this last year, I had a chance to interview JBL. And I did that in front of a group of people. And the topic was Texas wrestling. And I felt like because I used to watch Stampede Wrestling every Saturday. And then there was a Vancouver promotion called All-Star Wrestling. And then Maple Leaf Wrestling, which was our version of Superstars. That would be basically on a Saturday growing up in the late 80s, early 90s. That was a 3-hour block on Canadian television. And so you would see some of this stuff. And as I got older and I started, tape trading and seeing some of the stuff that would come from Texas, Stampede Wrestling and a lot of the stuff that you would see at the Von Erichs and some of the different and I mean there's when we talked with JBL we talked about how there are like 5 real major schools of thought when it comes to Texas wrestling. They're all the different promotions in Texas, they all have their different flavor, but the similarities I would say have very there's a lot of similarities with Stampede Wrestling. Stampede Wrestling could have been a 6th Texas promotion kind of a thing. I absolutely, I could not agree with you more about that.
Agreed. Okay, well, we'll dive into pro wrestling, but give me. So every so often, I mean, my entire life since I can remember, I mean, it really has been pro wrestling and late night TV, and I don't know what the connection really is there other than the entertainment genre, but I can remember being very young when I was growing up. The two guys on TV were David Letterman and Jay Leno. Those are the two that we would watch. Now, my folks, a little bit older than me, they lean more Leno when I was growing up. So I watched a lot of Tonight Show. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I appreciated David Letterman and everything he brought to the table. What is your earliest memories of late night TV, and what was the hook for you? How did you really get involved in this genre?
Okay. Yeah, no. It was pro wrestling because growing up, I used to remember when Saturday Night's Main Event was on, and Saturday Night's Main Event would take the place of Saturday Night Live. So it was what they tried to do at NBC is create a show for when SNL was dark that could be new programming that would kind of keep the time slot going. And Saturday Night's Main Event became that show. And that was also at the rise of Hulk Hogan and all that sort of stuff. Well, I'm sitting there, 9 years old. So I'm kind of right in the crosshairs of the perfect viewer for that as a kid, because my neuroplasticity was still, the cement was still wet, and yet at the same time. So if I could discover that program, which I did, and thank goodness we had a VCR, so I could time record if my parents wouldn't let me stay up that late, I would watch Saturday night's main event 3 times on the Sunday morning the next day. So sometimes I would set the time recorder off. I would be off a week because Saturday night's main event was only on, once every couple months. It wasn't on all the time, right? And so I would get Saturday Night Live, and it was like, oh, okay, and I would watch it. And so Saturday Night Live probably was the gateway. At the same time, my dad watched Carson. He watched Johnny Carson. And it wasn't quite religion for him, but he watched it a lot. And so I took note of that. And I knew that sometimes Dad would let me stay up and watch Johnny with him. And I would see the beginning of Late Night with David Letterman. And it really kicked off when I was 9 years old. And I even remembered the segment, and Letterman historian Don Giller actually found the segment for me. I was sleeping over at a friend's house. And, when you sleep over at friends' houses and you're sub 10 years old, the big thing is that you get to stay up late. Staying up late, we were flipping through the channels, and I knew Carson because of my dad, and Carson had ended and Letterman started. Well, about 10 minutes into the show, there's this segment where there were these stacks of dishes, china, plates. They were stacked up, and somebody had a remote control car, and they were taking the remote control car and they were driving around the obstacle course, and of course smashing the dishes all on the stage and making a big mess. And I remember thinking, adults get to act silly on this show. And I loved the idea that as adults, you could still act in a silly way. You could still act childlike. And that was my earliest attachment memory to going, oh, I like Letterman. I like this show. And so that's probably so to kind of connect the dots. Yeah. Then suddenly, oh, you attach to these shows, you want to watch them all. And that's where it all kind of started. But Letterman was always my guy.
So, okay, you saw SNL because it bled over, or you taped the wrong thing for Saturday night's main event or what have you. Was SCTV not big when you were coming up? Was that kind of off the air by then?
Oh gosh, I mean, in Canada, that's royalty to us, right? SCTV is absolutely, it's Canadiana in at its finest as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, if you're looking at for a modern day equivalent, it's not the same thing because it's not a sketch show, but you go and watch Letterkenny. I mean, there's Canadian sensibility. Schitt's Creek is another good example of that.
And that has Catherine O'Hara. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And so I think there's a part of the humor that would come out from some of these places, the Lampoon, same thing. I think there's a similar sensibility. So yeah, SCTV was definitely big up here as well.
So you said you were always a Letterman guy.
Yes.
Growing up I'm sure he's appointment viewing for you. Yeah. What was your early memories of Carson, though? I mean, what was your read on him when you were a kid? Would you ever say, oh, you know what? I see why people like this guy. Or was it like, he's a little too old for me, Letterman's speaking to my generation?
Yeah. So Carson, like, to me, was my dad's version of show business. So Carson has Frank Sinatra on. And I watched my dad in awe of these two titans of show business, right? I mean, arguably Johnny Carson, Frank Sinatra, two of the biggest stars of the world of their day.
Yeah.
You get there's a couple other people that you'd put on that pedestal. And to him, those guys were big show business. Well, to me, I mean, Madonna would have been big show business at that point because she was coming up at that time. And that's probably an example of an icon that came up around my time. And Dave would be another one. And the other thing about Dave is that he wasn't just a comedian. He was a broadcaster and presented himself as a broadcaster. I didn't make that connection until maybe I read Carter's book, because the Late Shift, again, when the Late Shift happened and the Letterman thing happened, I was in grade 11, grade 12,
Oh, wow. Okay.
So formative years. And so I knew the difference between Carson and Dave because Carson was like big time revered show business, where Letterman was a bunch of guys screwing around in a television studio, but he still presented himself like a broadcaster. And that's what I loved. I knew it immediately that there was a big difference between the two of them. But then every once in a while, Carson would show up on Letterman's show. Or vice versa. I would see, and that's when the worlds would collide. And it was such a beautiful collision of two very different times, both having mutual respect for each other. And I really, really appreciated that as well. And again, all of this is while my cement was still wet. So when I see Dave on the Tonight Show screwing around with Johnny, screwing around with the other guests that are there and doing stuff. And there's a segment where, Johnny steals Dave's truck because they live near to each other. And there's all these things. I'm seeing these things as a formative viewer growing up. And it's just like, oh, this is great. This is the stuff I really, really want to see, because it kind of connected how I thought to the way my dad thought. And those two worlds collided. And I really enjoyed that. Yeah,
I always loved when Johnny, especially when Johnny would be on Dave's show. Yeah, I think he went more from Mr. Carson to Johnny on that show. Yeah, and was able to let loose. I even remember where he brought his own desk, I believe, one time out and things of that nature. Okay, so you hit on something that I wanted to get to. You mentioned the Carter books. Bill Carter, yes, who's a fantastic author, has covered this since who can remember. Yep. You've had him on your podcast, I believe, twice. I have had him, and I gotta say this about Bill Carter. He is on latenighter.com now. Latenighter.com just showed up, and Bill Carter is the editor at large on latenighter.com. And if you want to see, he just had an interview with Jimmy Fallon that went up, I believe, yesterday or the day before. So Bill Carter, as far as I'm concerned, the authority when it comes to this stuff. He's reported on, he used to be with the New York Times, reported on this for well over 3 decades. The Late Shift is 30 years old right now. It's crazy. What is Late Nighter, though? What is he doing on the site? Latenighter.com is a site that's devoted to the happenings in late night. You talked about appointment television, sports and late night are really two of the only appointment television award shows, I guess. Some of the only appointment television that really exists anymore. And so Late Nighter has a newsletter. It goes out every single day. Here's what happened. Here's the monologues from last night. Here are the big notes that happened. Here are the guests that are coming up. And then they're obviously rounding it out with all sorts of different late night content. So Bill Carter is an editor at large there. It's brand new. It just came out. I highly recommend it for those who are enthusiasts of anything in late night, past or present. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I stumbled across the Bill Carter books. It must have been, I don't know. Well, I don't know when the War for Late Night came out. 2010, maybe. Yeah, War for Late Night came out after the Conan thing. That was the sequel to the Late Shift. That was just that, and I read that one first. And interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Oh, because here's the thing. Fascinating to me. Here's where we can relate. Because for you in you were grade 11 and 12, I think you said, for the Late Shift. Yeah, that's the same grade I was in when the Conan Leno stuff went down. There you go. Same exact age, and that was, I remember being enthralled by. And I do want to talk to you about that. I know I want to get to Dave, but I want to talk all late night with you because we can go. I'm really fascinated by what you think, especially because we'll get to it. But I read War for Late Night, and then I said, wait a minute, there's a part 1? Wait a minute, there's a movie? Okay, I'm all in. And I remember watching that movie over and over again, reading The Late Shift, and going into it. I think before reading the books or knowing about the story behind how Jay gets the Tonight Show, I always heard Jay Leno hid in the closet and then convinced everyone that they should give the show to him and stole it from Dave. But clarify this for me and the listeners. Dave initially never had the Tonight Show. It was offered to Jay. And then after Jay kind of had a slump in the ratings for a little while, they thought, okay, maybe we can give it to Dave now if he waits out Leno's contract. But before that, like when Johnny was leaving, Dave never had the show, right? No. And so, I mean, I've read this story and talked to so many people around that were there while this was happening. And the consensus seems to be
Letterman, of course, wanted the Tonight Show. I mean, I believe he's the fastest person that went from being a guest on the Tonight Show to guest hosting Carson's Tonight Show, and did that a lot of the time, and had a great time doing that. So much so that when it was time for NBC to make a change from the Tomorrow Show, Carson Productions gets involved, and Late Night with David Letterman was actually in association with Carson Productions, and so. At that point, Johnny was getting up there. It was unprecedented times. Johnny was on air for 30 years. At this point here, he's kind of at the zenith of his power, if you want to call it that, I guess. And so Dave had ultimate reverence for Johnny and would never, inside, did he want to be considered for the replacement for the Tonight Show? Absolutely. Did he put forward any strategic or ambitious offerings towards that? Absolutely not even a little bit. But of course he wanted to be, considered for it. And I believe if I were to throw an opinion out there, in their camp, the work speaks for itself. The work that we do speaks for itself, and we would do whatever it takes to make any adjustments to go from the 12:30 slot to the 11:30 slot. Now you have other people in other areas. Jay Leno had a manager named Helen Kushnick, and I don't want to go too. She's passed away, and tragic story with Helen. But at the same time, a personality that is
bit
aggressive to say the least. Yes, very much so. And her client, she for a time actually had David Letterman as a client. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that.
But not very long. But she managed Jay Leno, and aggressively, because at that point Late Night was going great guns, and the permanent guest host for the Tonight Show was Jay Leno, who made his bones as a guest on Letterman. He wouldn't be on Carson as often as a comic. He was on Letterman, and he was a fantastic panel guest on Letterman. Letterman would
one of the greats.
Oh, absolutely. Just absolute magic between the two of them. It was literally like two jazz artists throwing it back and forth.
And when you watch, not to interject, but when you watch Leno on Letterman, Dave is enjoying himself a lot. Like, he's really enjoying the conversation. He's enjoying the jokes. Sometimes I felt like Dave, he'd be entertained by certain guests. Yeah. He would find certain guests interesting, some not so much, but he enjoyed talking to Leno.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And the thing that I love about it is David Letterman has the art of making something look like a surprise or look spontaneous down. He hates surprises. At the very beginning with the morning show and whatnot, there was the talk about, because Dave's reactions are so fast and so witty and so just top shelf. He might be the best reaction comic that's ever lived. And so, but he hates surprises. So what he got really good at doing was you never really knew if something was scripted or not. And so Leno would start as panel. And of course, things are set up and whatnot. And when there's a comic on panel on a talk show, many times the host has the setup, punchline, setup, punchline, setup, punchline. And they just restructure a stand-up act into an interview. Well, with Leno, you never really knew what was like. You kind of see where they're going, and then suddenly Letterman will throw a monkey wrench right into it. He'll say something of his own, and then you're relying on Leno's spontaneity to go back and forth. And with those two, in my opinion, you never really knew what was produced and what was off the cuff. And it was at its art. It was comedic conversation. Just the blueprint for talk show comedic conversation. It was amazing when those two would be on together. And so, Helen saw the writing on the wall, like many people did. Many people saw Carson's reign was going to be coming to an end. He had amassed a tremendous amount of power. NBC had given up a whole bunch of leverage to Carson. And when he did decide to retire, they were going to get a whole bunch of that leverage back. Well, Helen was positioning and negotiating and strategically putting things into place to get Leno that show. He's the permanent guest host. We must get him the show. If we don't, we're going to walk. And all of these things were happening behind closed doors. The exact opposite of what Dave would ever do. Dave had so much reverence for Johnny. He would never, and again, this is all, tangential. I mean, I'm not an authority. I wasn't there, but the consensus seems to be that he would never ever jockey for such a thing, and that's how.
Politic.
Yeah, he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't politic, and it was only what you're talking about where they actually did offer him the show. There's ironies to it, because the same thing happened to Conan. It was just a different period, so Leno got the show, and it only came time when Dave was going to walk. And the idea when Dave was courted, when he knew he didn't want to do 11:30 anymore, when he was courted by all of these different networks and whatnot, it was a sight to see. We had Robert Morton on the show, asked him about what it was like when you were in Mike Ovitz's office and you had all these suitors coming in, and he just said it was one of the greatest moments ever. It was such
Robert
a fun
Morton was
time.
the producer, executive producer, and then Ovitz was the agent.
There you go. So thank you for that. Yeah, and so. One of the things that happened was right at the 11th hour, NBC, not impressed that they were going to lose Letterman and not overly impressed with Leno's ratings, said, okay, we'll give you the Tonight Show. You just got to wait for Leno's contract to end. And I think it was 18 months. And I mean, everybody in Dave's camp was like, what do you think? You can't consider this. There's no way they're going to, you've got a moment here. Don't lose your moment. And in my opinion, the greatest decision ever made was that he left NBC, because that created the legacy of his own. And Dave, in my opinion, has the most colorful legacy in all of late night. I love his career more than I love Johnny Carson's, even though I do have reverence for Johnny, because my dad does, because Dave does. And I respected Johnny's talent. Johnny was awesome. He just wasn't my Johnny. Dave was my Johnny, if that makes sense. Yeah. So. Yeah.
It is interesting. When I was thinking about this, when I knew I was going to talk to you, I was thinking a lot about David Letterman, and I think he really is the closest I think anyone ever got to a Johnny Carson level again, and has the reverence of it. I think from the talent standpoint, and maybe we would disagree on this, I'm not sure, but I think Jimmy Fallon is one of the most talented overall guys, as far as, great on the monologues, great in the sketches. Carson did a lot of sketches back in the day. He would do a lot of bits, the tea time, vignettes, or when he dressed up as Reagan or things. And so a lot of Carson does remind me of Fallon. But as far as the reverence, like, I'm going on Letterman tonight. I'm going to talk to David Letterman. I can't believe I had a friend. She played in a band, or plays in a band called the Suffers, and they were on the Late Show one time. And David Letterman, I believe, said, if you can't do that, referring to their performance, you shouldn't be in music, and kissed her on the head. And she was like, I can't believe David Letterman kissed me on the head. This is the most incredible thing in the world, and he has that reverence. At what point, though, do you think that he achieved that? It wasn't during late night, and it had to be during the Late Show run. Would you say that perhaps after he came back and addressed the nation post 9/11, and then it feels like that was a shift to where Letterman's the voice of our nation?
There were moments, and the moments are definitely bookmarked. You can definitely go through it. You can read the tea leaves back. I would talk about Fallon for a second. Fallon gets he takes a lot on the chin.
He does.
Forgive the Leno reference. He does. He takes a lot on the chin. And I'll tell you this: there are some certain similarities that he definitely has to Carson. There's no question. The sketches in the Tonight Show that are there, I think, are Carson-esque in the sense that, and whether you like Jimmy or you don't like Jimmy, let me throw this out there. When Johnny Carson, we used to do the Art Fern, or there's one where I just love it. I loved it so much. It's one of my favorite Johnny Carson moments of all time. Julio Iglesias is there, and Johnny Carson comes out dressed as Willie Nelson with a spot on Willie Nelson impression. Okay. Yes, it's so good. And they're singing To All the Girls I Loved Before. And you watch Julio's response to just seeing Johnny dressed up as Willie Nelson, because it's a spot on impression. But whenever Johnny would dress up in something else, he had the ability to always look at the camera and do a little smile, and I don't know, it's like he has a biological switch in his mind that we all don't have behind our eyes, where Johnny Carson could light up his eyes. He just could do this thing where he kind of lit up his eyes and you would see it's Johnny, no matter who he's dressed as. Like, we're in on the joke together.
Mm-hmm.
Fallon has that. He has that. And it's probably comes from when he would break on sketches on SNL. It probably comes from that, a little bit of that. But Fallon has this thing where he could be in some sort of a comedy piece, singing a comedy song. Again, the talent this guy has. Like, listen to him to do Neil Young sing the Fresh Prince theme, like things like that. Like Jimmy Fallon is so talented, but sometimes he could be immersed in that, and he could look and he could kind of, his eyes, and there's Jimmy, and Jimmy shares this moment with his audience. And I think that is something that he has similar to Carson. The reverence for Dave. The bookmarks that are there, I would say, obviously coming over to starting Late Show is a huge one.
Sure.
Just the idea. And again, Bill and I talked about this, and I'm so grateful. There was a conversation for 20 something years I wanted to have with Bill Carter, where so many people, Jay Leno, and no offense to Mr. Leno whatsoever. I mean, his run speaks for itself. But he'll be the first to tell you that well, I got the show at number one, and I left the show at number one. Like, he's the first to tell you that. Number one in this case does not matter, because people don't understand what the Tonight Show was. The Tonight Show was an insurmountable mountain that no franchise could ever compete with, that could ever just hang with them. And I mean, you had counter programming, you had your Joey Bishops, Dick Cavett. He did a phenomenal job of trying to. He's been on our show, and I really have
you got to talk to Dick Cavett.
Ultimate. It's one of my funnest moments ever is talking to Mr. Cavett, and so he counter programmed Johnny for a while, but at the end of the day, nothing could touch the franchise that was the Tonight Show. And this is where Saturday Night Live comes from, because it's like, well, we want to continue our dominance at this time period at the National Broadcasting Corporation, and Saturday Night's Main Event and all that sort of stuff. It all spawned from the dominance that they had at that time slot. Nothing could touch it. And for Dave to walk across the street, figuratively, it was really about 8-9 blocks, whatever it is, right? Start in the Ed Sullivan Theater and come out with a show that actually competed against the Tonight Show. Dave took the franchise that he revered forever, walked across the street, and made it fallible. And that, to me, right there starts what you're talking about, is the reference for that, even though that's sort of the unsaid portion of things. Yeah, you were number one, but you had somebody that could beat you on good nights, beat you soundly when on paper he should not have beaten. From an affiliate lineup standpoint, that first 18 months should not have been possible, where Dave could beat NBC just from logistically, but he did.
You talk about the number of stations that carried the Late Show as opposed to the Tonight Show. Right.
Brad, thank you for reeling me in. I go so deep on this stuff. Like, I go so deep into it.
You and I are the same.
Well,
We're the same.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you providing the context. Yeah. And so I think, to me, that's kind of the first one, is the reaction of Late Show, the fact that Late Show competed in the first place. You had your big moments early on. You had your moments with Madonna and Drew Barrymore. Those are the very publicized moments. But then like just big moments would happen. And I think another one was, and before 9/11, of course, was a monumental bookmark for so many reasons. But when Dave went off for heart surgery, which happened before 9/11.
It was 2000, I believe.
It was even,
was it 99?
2000? I thought it was 98 maybe, but anyway, we'll find that out. We'll find that out. Yeah, late 90s, Dave goes off for heart surgery. And there are guest hosts for Late Show, because CBS still has to have an offering out there, and it's uncertain as to what's happening. And then when Dave comes back from the heart surgery, I think that there was a very notable reaction to that reception that was far beyond, oh, good, the main host of the Late Show is back. It's, oh, God, we could have lost Dave. And we're really grateful that we didn't lose Dave. I think that that's probably a marker. And then, of course, 9/11. And then the other one too, for your generation, for the millennials and below, I think was Dave's reaction during Late Shift 2, during the Conan Leno thing. And to me, that is my favorite.
Stuff.
Oh, it's my favorite run of all of Letterman's run. And I love, don't get me wrong, I love all of it. A lot of people say, oh, Mike, you like Late Show better than Late Night. No, I don't. I like the whole thing. Just like my favorite bands, I like their whole body of work, right? My favorite moment was in 2010 for about a 6-week period or whatever it was, or a 4-week period where Conan lost the Tonight Show and Dave's reaction to it. It's my favorite run. And I think that was probably another bookmark of the reverence for Dave as well.
You know, because there was the Jay interview, or the Jay on his primetime show did the Don't Blame Conan thing, right? and then Dave did his desk piece about the Don't Blame Conan. It is so funny. It is so biting. It is so real. You could tell that. And I think maybe why that resonated with me, and like you said, it was your favorite run of his on the Late Show, is because it was steeped in so much of his own personal history that he finally kind of got to work some of that out in front of the nation. And honestly, when you talk about appointment television, more than, I want to hear what Conan has to say, or more than I want to hear what Leno has to say about this, I want to hear what Dave has to say about this.
Absolutely.
Because he was the objective third party to where we could really feel. And I think a lot of people, I think their opinions on that time period were shaped by what Letterman said and did during that time, which brings me up to a moment that I really wanted to ask you about. Actually, I'm not joking with you. Last night, I was still awake. It was maybe 1:30 in the morning, 1:45, and I go, oh, I got to ask Mike about this. And I grabbed my phone and I typed the note out because I want to know, as such a Letterman guy. Now, again, I want to establish Leno. I really enjoyed Jay Leno a lot.
Absolutely.
I really, really like Leno a lot, especially as a kid. And I understand why he was number one. I understand his appeal. There's a lot of things we could get into with that. But I wanted you to know, because the Dave and Leno, the Dave and Jay rivalry, if you want to call it that, was so large during the Late Shift period. People picked their sides. During the Conan Tonight Show run, I think people's sides were even more solidified. Anti-Jay. Okay. And I'm talking about even other hosts, Jimmy Kimmel, George Lopez. They were very anti-Jay. What did you think, as a lifelong Dave fan, of the Super Bowl ad? The Super Bowl ad where, for people who don't remember, Dave's there. He's saying this party sucks. It pans out, and there's Oprah there. So you think that that's where it's going to end. And then it pans out to the 3-shot, and it's Jay Leno saying, he's just saying that because I'm here. I remember seeing it when it happened vividly and going, wait a minute. No, that's not real. And it was. A lot of people looked at that as Letterman throwing Leno a life preserver. I think that's even what Jimmy Kimmel characterized it as, and almost felt somewhat betrayed. What did you think of the Super Bowl ad?
I am of the opinion that if it can provide a moment and it's funny, you do it. And to me, I'll tell you, I can remember it. I watched it real time, and I freaked the hell out. And I was so grateful for, like, I'm a hockey guy, and I'm a pro wrestling guy. I'm a hockey guy. I'm Canadian, right? And so hockey's religion up here. But I do watch the Super Bowl. I watch big football games, and I understand the game and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not the guy that records the Super Bowl. I mean, when Dre was on a couple years ago, I put that on. I recorded the Dr. Dre performance, sure, but I don't record the Super Bowl. I was so grateful that I had the DVR with the rewind feature where I could hit record, because when I saw it, I freaked the hell out. I was like, because I knew, it was on CBS. I knew there was going to be a Letterman commercial of some sort, and so I was keenly watching for it. I'm the guy that does watch the Super Bowl and am probably about 53% interested more in the commercials than I am the actual game.
Understand?
What? There's a new Deadpool trailer, to the Super Bowl. Let's watch. So watching that, I watched it probably 10 times in a row, and got to the point where it was like, okay, this is not CG, this is real. You know, apparently then sitting President Obama apparently had someone make some calls to find out if that was real when he watched it real time. That's how big this was. At that time, unfortunately, I didn't know anybody in the production. And so I wasn't able to ask any questions. But I found out sometime later that originally Conan was asked to be there as well. And that made sense to me. Did it throw Jay Leno a life preserver? Yes, but who the hell cares? Like, it did. It totally did. It 100% did throw him a life preserver. But who cares? It was funny. It was awesome. It wasn't. It didn't hurt anybody in doing that. And if getting a bit of a cleaner PR image at the time was Jay's motivation for coming on, like that's a mark that he will always have, that Jay will never have. You know, he had Leno as a part of something on Late Show. Famously, neither one of them went on each other's shows, right? But that's something that the Letterman camp will always have. It was historic. They had to do it for their franchises, the way I look at it. That was a moment they had to do. There's a story that you might like. There was an opportunity where they could have done some cross promotion. Like you think about cross promotion of shows. You think about back in the day with WWF at the time and WCW in the same show, and the D-Generation X showing up at a WCW event. Okay, and the idea that two shows could actually merge at the same time while filming, right. Like that's kind of a cool thing. There was one opportunity for Letterman Leno to do it earlier. Do you remember Rupert's sketches?
Yes.
Remember Rupert G on the Hello Deli, and Dave would put him in sketches. One time they were down in California and Rupert was bothering people. And the way that it would go is that there were two vans, the van that Dave was in and the van that Rupert was in. Rupert would go off. Dave would have, Rupert would have an earpiece direct to Dave, and Dave would tell Rupert, and Rupert had to say verbatim exactly what Dave put into the. Right. So the two vans. So Rupert's telling me this story. One day the van stopped. They're in California. The van stopped. And they stopped for an inordinate amount of time. It's out of the ordinary as to why they're stopped this long. And he's just sitting there, and there's discussion going on between the vans, whether or not to send Rupert out. And the reason that there was discussion is there's Jay Leno over there doing a jaywalking segment. Can you imagine? Like this is, if there was one thing that I wish that we could go back and rewind and rewrite history, it wouldn't be Dave getting the Tonight Show, because we wouldn't have Letterman wouldn't have ascended, I don't think, if he would have gotten the Tonight Show the way he did. No, that wouldn't be the history I would change. If there was one little piece of history I would change, that's the piece of history I would change. They made the decision to not send Rupert out to go bother Jay. Can you imagine David Letterman using Rupert G as a sock puppet to talk to Jay Leno? Can you imagine how funny that would be? And anyway, so
that's a missed moment. That's a missed moment. You know, it's funny.
And they didn't miss it at the Super Bowl. To bring it back to they didn't miss that moment for the Super Bowl commercial, and that's why I think it's important they did it.
You know, it reminds me of, and as a wrestling fan, you'll know when DX invaded WCW.
Yep.
Had WCW had the wherewithal to say, you know what, let him in.
Yep.
Let's turn the cameras on, because then everybody's going to flip from the WWF show to the WCW show to see what's happening. They didn't, and it was a moment missed. And wow, to see Rupert interrupt Jay during a jaywalking segment,
right?
And you know what? It would have benefited both shows. And it would have been
100%.
something that we would have always talked about. Do you remember when? You know,
and Letterman would have got the last word. Like Leno would have got whatever footage he got of Rupert. I've thought a lot about this. I mean, you know, whatever footage that Leno decided to use, okay, great. He has his footage. Letterman has his footage. They all go back to their corners. But Letterman would have had the last word, because he could have Rupert sitting right beside him. Come from the deli, come sit down. Hey, let's talk about this a little bit. Let's go and let's and they could have, you know, he would have had the last word with it. I think it just would have been absolute for nerds like us, for the very select few people who absolutely go deep on this stuff and get stoked about this stuff. It would have been one of the greatest moments in television history. It would have ascended both shows. It was a moment that would have been bigger than both shows.
Yeah, it would have been a part of television history. It would have been always shown. Yeah,
that's one of my favorite stories.
Hey, do you remember where you were kind of moment.
Yep. It's one of my favorite stories Rupert tells me. Like Rupert, you know, I mean, he told me so many of the stories about that, because when they would do those shoots, they'd be out 6-8 hours sometimes. And when you know, Rupert would tell me all these sorts of stories that would happen around shooting those segments, and I just love it. But that story is just the one that's the crown jewel for me as the, I don't know, the aficionado of this stuff, I guess. That's the crown jewel missed moment for me. I love that idea that could have happened.
It would have been incredible to see. You know, being that we're venturing a bit down pro wrestling territory, I want to ask you about 2 wrestling moments involving late night television specifically, and I just want to hear what you think about them. One, since we're talking about Jay, what did you think of Jay's involvement in WCW and wrestling Hulk Hogan?
Yeah, you know, it was funny. It was one of those things where, see, Dave would always refer to wrestling. Like, I always loved when Dave would talk about wrestling. Wrestlers' names would appear in his top 10 lists back in the day. And we're talking late night, right? He would have wrestlers on occasionally. You know, you think of Andre the Giant. You think of the segments he did with Vince McMahon early on, like really early on, where Vince McMahon's at a hospital waiting for a baby to be born.
Why? How did that happen? Do you know? Like, why was
that's one I want to go deep with. My one of the guys who helped me build this show, who worked for Dave for 32 years. That's him right there. His name's Rick Sheckman, Shecky. Rick Sheckman and I became friends, and he passed away sadly this time last year. We love you, Rick. We miss you.
Yeah.
He was a gigantic wrestling fan. Grew up in Queens his whole life. Would go down to the moments that you and I have heard of as lore. Every month would go to MSG. Every month. Saw most of San Martino's run. Saw most of so he was very, very steeped in old time WWF wrestling. And so when Vince took over, and the Saturday Night's Main Event connection, right, with NBC and all that stuff. So how can we involve these guys a little bit more? My inkling, I asked Rick a lot about that when he and I were becoming friends. Sadly, that's some of the stuff that I don't like. It was a phone call. We talked about the stuff and it was amazing. And I can't pull all the details the way that I wish I could. But to me, the reason that any connection that started back then, Saturday Night Main Event, was a part of that. And if they could figure out a way to incorporate somehow, they would do it. And one of the incorporations that they did was they had Vince McMahon
waiting for the first baby to be born on New Year's, right?
Yeah. And my favorite part of that is because Vince is in his formative years at that point. I mean, he'd been broadcasting and whatnot, but I mean, he wasn't the Vince McMahon of today at that point in many respects.
Well, thankfully.
And thankfully. And David Letterman says to him, so via satellite, they're going back and forth, and Dave and Vince are talking, which is just crazy to me to even say out loud. Man. Yeah. And Dave says, Vince, is that your tuxedo? And Vince just says, no. He has no response whatsoever. Just no, it's not. And the crowd just pops from it, and it's such a funny moment.
I remember seeing that and going, this is one of the strangest like things to see and to hear, because again, I think at that time people didn't really understand what Vince was the on-air play-by-play guy, the announcer.
That's right.
You know, and he was playing that role, that character for Dave. And I remember Dave having a lot of fun with the straight-laced Vince McMahon.
Very much so. So, but always tongue in cheek.
Yes.
Like, you know, if one of the entries in a top 10 list was the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, they would always, like, it was said in jest. It was said, you know, he referred to, it's like big time wrestling. That's a Lettermanism. Big time wrestling, right? And he would refer to it as the way it was. When Jay got involved, and you had DDP and whatnot, you had the NWO on the set of the Tonight Show. To me, I understood it from like marketing and all that stuff. Oh, could this be a big moment? You know, I think they wanted that to be their Mike Tyson moment, like when Mike Tyson showed up at WWF. But when Tyson showed up at WWF, it was a completely different animal. It didn't feel like a gimmick. Right. To me, those guys showing up on the stage of the Tonight Show, on the set of the Tonight Show, and Jay Leno being involved in an angle felt like a gimmick to me. It felt cartoony. And when Dave would refer to pro wrestling, there were some earnest moments. Like I think it was the first time The Rock appeared on Letterman, and they were talking about Whipper Billy Watson and some of these other stuff that Dave liked when he was a kid growing up. You know, the old timey stuff, and the nostalgia behind it. It's just the attitude towards wrestling was very, very different. And I think that the attitude that Jay had there, where he was actually in the ring and we actually had to suspend our disbelief to the point where Jay clotheslines. I mean, come on. Like I'm sorry, but that's not how you use Jay Leno. If you're going to use Jay Leno in a wrestling angle, in my opinion, again, I'm not a,
that's also the WCW side of things. I think if Vince had the ability at that time to work an angle with the Tonight Show, it would have been a bit more creative than let's put Jay in a match. Yeah. Let him do a wrist lock on Hogan for 5 minutes. And let people take photos.
I can't think of the moment, but like when you think about when Rock goes on Saturday Night Live, and then maybe there's some cross promotion between WWE and Saturday Night Live. It's a little more nuanced. It's a little more clever. If you're going to have, you know, a comedic actor come out like Johnny Knoxville or Will Sasso, or you're going to have a comedic actor come out and do something in the ring, they're still going to be themselves with their ability or lack thereof compared to the wrestlers around them. And they nuance it a little bit more, and I don't think they nuanced that enough with when Jay was part of that. And to me, that sort of diluted the effect.
Yeah, I now you know what, I am gonna though back up and correct myself, because I said that WWF would have done better with that angle, and perhaps they would have. But then I do fast forward when they had Jon Stewart involved in an angle, and he did hit John Cena with a steel chair. Yeah, cost him the match at SummerSlam. So you know.
Hitting a guy with a steel chair, or believing that Jon Stewart could have such a mighty clothesline.
Good point.
That you know, that to me, even just a little detail like that changes things. You know, because I mean, forever we've seen valets. Well, if a valet has a brick in her purse, the brick still does its job. You know, and I think that kind of falls into that category. I think you said it right there. The steel chair alone changes it, and it doesn't dilute it as much as it did with Jay. I don't want to see Jay plan a spot where it involves his athleticism. Karl Malone, you got, because that's a super athlete. Like with Karl Malone or Rodman, those guys, you could tell how much those guys trained, and they made it look as good as what a wrestling fan would want from a standard position, so they don't lose their disbelief. You know, Leno didn't do it for me. But it was big. Like seeing Hulk Hogan on the set of The Tonight Show was big to me, but it was pop music big. And this is the difference that I love. Carter, it's a Carter example, I believe. Might have been Morty, might have been Rob Burnett who originally said it. I forget who, but I am in this camp. Leno is pop music, and a lot of people love pop music. Letterman is Pink Floyd or Radiohead or something completely different, but so awesome and detailed and but Leno is pop music, and to me what he did on WCW was pop music.
That's a great assessment of it. Now let me bring you to another late night wrestling moment that is probably one of the most talked about, if not the most talked about moment involving wrestling and late night television, and it is David Letterman, and it's Andy Kaufman, and it's Jerry Lawler. There's the picture right there behind you.
Yeah, it's signed to my friend Mike, Jerry Lawler, right there.
Look at that. You know, Jerry the King Lawler and Andy Kaufman had a legendary run in the Memphis territory. Thank you for sharing that photo, by the way. That's a beautiful picture.
Talking to Jerry about that was surreal, and I've had 2 conversations about it with him.
Yeah,
not on the show, unfortunately. I'm trying real hard. We were right there, and then he had a stroke. So,
we hope
our thoughts go with Jerry right now. I hope that your life is getting back to where it was.
I hope he's doing well. Yeah, I've had one conversation with Jerry the King Lawler backstage at the Royal Rumble in San Antonio, Texas, and all we talked about was Quentin Tarantino movies.
Oh, that's excellent.
What a random conversation, right?
You talk about pop culture. There's a guy, Jerry Lawler is a guy who is an aficionado of pop culture.
Owns the Batmobile.
That's right. And when he went into the Hall of Fame, William Shatner, no. Jerry the King Lawler is very, very much a pop culture aficionado. And that moment with Andy Kaufman was so big for pro wrestling. I don't think if there's a moment that was big for pro wrestling, I think people look back to Andre Hogan. I think people look back to, the rise of Hulkamania and things like that. But I think that one of the biggest moments in pro wrestling history is Andy Kaufman on Letterman with Jerry Lawler, and that entire thing. He put so many more eyeballs on that product, and did it in a way that it was so old school that people just didn't know what was real and what wasn't. He blurred the line in a way that had just never been done on such a scale. From a pop culture standpoint, and really, really built a major bridge between the everyman and pro wrestling.
Yeah. You know what? You're absolutely right. And as crazy as it sounds, the guy from Taxi brought believability back to pro wrestling in that moment, because for years there were people who swore Dave knew nothing about it. That was not a setup.
Yep.
He hit him for real. And I mean, Jerry did, lay it in there, brother. He definitely got him good on there, and he should have, because he had to make it look good.
Yeah.
But Dave did know about it. I think Andy called him the night prior, I believe, or
yeah. That part I can't speak to as much. Now here's the cool part from my perspective in hosting the Letterman podcast. I've had like Gerard Mulligan, who was one of the segment producers that night. I've had Robert Morton on the show. I've had and Morty. I mean, Morty. His name was on Andy Kaufman's will. He was one of the witnesses for Andy. Like he knew Andy very, very well. And the thing about Andy was, again, we talked about the planned moments with Dave versus the spontaneity. Andy Kaufman always came off spontaneous on that show, no matter what he was doing. Right? Yeah. No, meticulously planned in advance. But you had people who would guest on Dave's show that would want to do spontaneous things because they watched the show. They were fans of the show, and they thought that's how it worked. No. When Steve Martin came on late show or late night with David Letterman, he meticulously planned the appearance weeks beforehand. Andy Kaufman was the same thing. So that Dave knew. Now, the thing about it that was so cool, though, and why it still works the way as effectively as it does, is because, Gerard Mulligan, who was one of the producers of the segment, didn't know. Most of the crew didn't know what was happening. And that was where the magic came into it. Only a very, very small number of people knew, but Dave, of course, being one of them. He didn't want to be surprised too much. Lawler, talking to Jerry Lawler about, by the way, just in a little aside, if you want to talk Andy Kaufman stories, have you talked to Jimmy Hart yet?
I've not about Andy Kaufman.
Okay, you need to.
But I have
next time you get Jimmy in a room. So we had Jimmy up for our promotion back in 2014, I want to say, and Jimmy was here for almost a week actually, and so every night I got to kind of go out for dinner with Jimmy Hart. And there was one night, the first night actually, I said, "Look, I want to talk wrestling with you, but I want to talk Andy Kaufman with you because." People don't understand. You talk about the realism and whatnot. Andy Kaufman spent weeks down in the Memphis territory. He was on the road. Mm-hmm. He was on the road. And it was back in a day where heels and faces, they were separate from each other. And Jimmy was his manager. Jimmy was kind of his guy. They were kind of married to each other for a while. And all of that, they went to Graceland together multiple times. They did all sorts of things. And so Jimmy Hart has so many Andy Kaufman stories that it's not even funny. I'm trying very hard to get him on here. He's really, really worried about, WWE giving permission and all that sort of stuff. I gotta make that go away somehow so he can come on the show, because I just want to have him on to have him for literally 2 hours tell Andy Kaufman stories that have never been told. There are people who have, read the biography of Andy Kaufman. They have no idea about this rich history about Andy. And so by that point, he and Jerry had the telepathy that two workers who do things together for so long have. And so it was kind of like jazz for them out there. They didn't know exactly how it was going to go, what was going to happen. They knew the coffee was sitting there. They knew the idea of Jerry standing up and cuffing him. They knew that was there, but they weren't exactly sure how it was going to go. And they did it the way that workers would work an angle back in the day. They kind of did it by feeling. And the thing talking to Jerry about it was after he cuffed him, Andy gets up and he screams and he goes and puts on the persona of the elitist Hollywood trash. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to lawyer. But he started swearing. He started dropping F-bombs like crazy, right? And Lawler is sitting there watching him. And now when you go back and watch it, and as you're sitting there, know that this is what's going through Jerry the King Lawler's mind at that point, because he was a promoter at that point for a long time, seasoned wrestling guy, right? Knows that this is a big deal. Going to New York as a Memphis promoter. Okay.
Right.
So you think about Jerry's, Jerry's point of view is very different than everybody else's point of view, because he's deep in the wrestling business, with Jerry Jarrett and going to New York, and shooting an angle essentially in another territory. He's sitting there, and as Kaufman, after Jerry's sitting down and Kaufman's doing this thing and swearing and all that, all Jerry is thinking is, "You idiot! Now they're not going to show this on TV." That's all he's thinking.
That's a worker, man.
That's all he's thinking. He's like, you messed it up, Andy. No, like, this was perfect, and now you messed it up. And thank goodness, to his delight, they actually, they put a little whistle to bleep out Andy's curses, and they put it on TV. And thank goodness they did that, because in doing so, like you said, created one of the biggest moments in pro wrestling history, and it was on Letterman's show.
And Dave's, a couple lines thereafter, now you can say some of those words on television. Great line. And then, but to me, the capper of the segment was, they come back from break. He goes, "I'm still here. Mr. Lawler's still here. And some nights I wish Tom was still here." Which is a reference to Tom Snyder in the Tomorrow Show.
Yeah.
Just great wit from David Letterman. Phenomenal. I love that you shared some more insight there on Andy Kaufman, because again, Andy's another guy who I'm just fascinated by. Absolutely. At the levels of all these late night legends. Andy is somebody who's just, I could talk to you for hours about Andy Kaufman and all the stuff that he does. Going into Dave's after, we're talking post 9/11.
Yep.
We're even post, he had the scandal, the blackmail scandal, post that, right? Yep. Which I don't know if there's probably anybody in the history of PR or broadcasting or anything that has handled an issue better, more eloquently, and addressed it, and then made it a non-issue almost instantaneous, like apologized, admitted, and moved on, and everyone was like, "Okay, cool, yeah, let's keep it going." He did that beautifully, and that was his talents as a broadcaster more than a comic in that very moment, which is what I was wanting to get to.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a lot of people talked about, not just the pop music versus, maybe the indie darling.
Yeah.
Right. But Dave's strength as a broadcaster. Now, he starts off as a weatherman in Indiana, right? Mm-hmm. Or he did that early on, came out to
radio as well,
and then came out to LA and was doing stand-up at the Comedy Store. That's where he meets Jay. That's where he meets all the people.
Yep.
How paramount do you think that radio and television background was to making David Letterman who he became?
Oh, you said the word. It was paramount.
Yeah.
Paramount. It was. He talks about the idea of going to the Comedy Store. And did you want to be a stand-up? No, I knew I would have to learn it. I knew I have to learn the discipline. I've done the same. I don't know if you've done this as well. I've done 6 or 7 stand-up spots because I want to get the skill under my belt. I already know that I'm a public speaker, and I can do that, and I can do that fairly well. But I wanted the actual act of stand-up. I wanted 3 minutes to try and connect with an audience and make them laugh a little bit. Not because I have any designs of being a stand-up, but because I want to get that discipline under my belt. Like, I understand Dave saying that. Dave knew he wanted the Tonight Show or a show very much like it. He knew he wanted that. Whether or not he could even articulate it at that point, but that was it seems to me, from everybody I've talked to and everything I've read and whatnot, it seems to me that was the thing that was in his guts, the thing that you couldn't even articulate it. And if you look at it, he probably is the greatest talk show host that has ever lived from a skills standpoint because of that broadcasting background. That's what made it happen for him. Jay Leno was a joke machine. He's a comedian, and jokes are everything about him. Everything's about the joke. Those are two very different personalities. And when you talk about some of the things that Dave has communicated about, and I mean, there's the scandal is probably the most public one, but the thing about Dave is we use that word communication. He communicates better than anybody. He's such and does it in a way that's so inviting and witty and entertaining. He puts the emphasis on certain words. He has certain words in his vocabulary. Letterman words there are words that are in my vocabulary or phrases that are in my vocabulary because of Dave, just the way he puts them. And he has a cynicism. I always say that he's my Walter Cronkite, and it bugs the heck out of my dad. How could you have somebody like that be your Walter Cronkite? Well, guess what? Our generation is the one that realized the baby boomers and their leadership of their generation kind of pulled some things over our eyes about certain things, right? Mm-hmm. And because of that, our generation, Gen X is a cynical generation in many ways. And I think Dave reflects that as a guy who speaks and spoke to our generation so often. So, and then when you look at what he's moved on to since Late Show, I adore My Next Guest with David Letterman on Netflix.
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you if you were okay with, because when Johnny left. Yeah. Jay and Dave have moved on to other shows.
And thank God. I mean, oh my gosh. Senator Al Franken was on I want to say it was a month before Dave retired from the Late Show. And Senator Franken said, he made a joke on stage, I'm really glad, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm really glad I have a chance to talk to you before you go off and become an eccentric recluse. and in a way that was kind of a nod to what Johnny did.
Yeah. Cause he disappeared.
Dave, this is if and when, I can have a conversation with Dave himself. That is actually one of the questions that I have for him. Mm-hmm. Famously, just fairly before Mr. Carson passed away in 2005, Letterman visited him and he had been on his yacht a couple of times or whatever it was. And clearly, Dave is a thoughtful man. He's very thoughtful. And I want to know if he made a decision before he retired from Late Show that he wasn't going to do that he was going to explore other opportunities and try and get out there. Like, it was only a few months after he retired that he appeared on Steve Martin and Martin Short do a live show that they tour around. You can see it on Netflix. It's really, really good.
Really funny.
Dave appeared in Texas, actually. Mm-hmm. Dave appeared on stage with them only a few months after he retired. And it really wasn't that long. He did the thing with National Geographic, which I thought was very good. He talked to the president of India. And at that point, you're like, holy crap, David Letterman is a broadcaster. He's talking to the president of India, and it's not as a guest on his show, for 3 6-minute segments that have been heavily produced with jokes inserted into them to make the exchange really good. No. This is a real conversation that he's having. And the curiosity of David Letterman, which I think is his superpower, along with his wit, has come out, and the thoughtfulness, asking about big world events, but at the same time being able to make a joke here and there, being able to make fun, being able to lighten the mood effortlessly, it seems. You see that and it's like, okay, this is a broadcaster. And then he goes, Dave Letterman was a huge fan of Tom Snyder, like a huge fan of him.
Tom is excellent. And I know Tom's kind of been forgotten somewhat in a lot of ways, but I encourage everyone to go on YouTube, watch old Tom Snyder interviews. I mean, so good.
I don't want to plug my show too much on here, Brad. I just wanted to talk to you. We had January of this year, we had Anne-Marie Snyder, Tom's daughter, on because they're working on a doc about Tom. We didn't talk about that so much because there's a bunch of things you can't talk about, but we talked about the progression of the tying in of David Letterman and Tom Snyder. And in that episode, we go through a lot of it, including like when, Larry Sanders talked about it and all that. We go really, really deep about it. But Tom appearing after Dave on CBS was such an homage, even though Dave replaced him on NBC. Dave used to watch Tom on the Tomorrow Show every single night. And Dave, when he brought him on to the Late Late Show in the press conference announcing it, said, I'm one of the people out there that can say I watched 85% of Tom Snyder's Tomorrow Show, which was a long form talk show. And there were no VCRs back then, kids. There's no DVRs. There's no YouTube the next day. You're staying up 12:30 to 1:30 in the morning to watch a long form conversation. And Dave loved that. And, to see him doing that in My Next Guest with a twist, because they put in little vignettes, they put in little sub stories or B stories or moments. But you tell me, like, where is there a better interview with Dave Chappelle than Dave Chappelle on My Next Guest with David Letterman? I don't think you're going to see one.
I venture to say some of the best interviews anybody has gotten with any of the people were on my next. I mean, I remember watching he interviewed Kim Kardashian, and I was riveted.
Great example. Great example.
Riveted.
Yeah. And no offense, like you like pop culture. Great. Maybe your wife's a fan of the Kardashians. My wife is, that sort of thing. But did you think that you would be riveted by anything Kim Kardashian did?
No. Yeah. No.
Impressed, good job. Great. I see what you've done. Very impressive.
You know what?
But
what's so
riveted.
this is the power of David Letterman. That interview changed my whole perspective on Kim Kardashian.
Me too.
I completely respect everything that woman has accomplished and does and continues to do. And I actually, that's a whole nother subject that I'm interested in is Kim Kardashian. But
yeah,
but Dave doing my next guest again was the elevation of, I think that it's only him and maybe Howard Stern as, wow, I can't believe such and such is interviewing me, or I'm doing Howard, or I'm going to do the Letterman interview. I mean, it's a massive deal, and I was interested by that. Now, a couple things, because I know we've talked for a long time. We didn't talk about how long I had you for, but I have you for a few more minutes.
As long as you want me. And as many times as you want me. I think you and I mean, that's the beautiful thing about podcasting. And this. And by the way, thank you for letting me kind of go off. I'm a windbag and I know it. You're a great listener. You're great at this, obviously seasoned and all of that stuff. What you're building and what you have done, it's been fun to watch how you've chased your dreams and you're going after it like crazy. A fisherman can always recognize another fisherman. I'm doing the same thing, not nearly at your level, Brad. I just want to say thank you for this. And anytime you want to talk, whether the recorder's on or not, let's do it, because obviously we're going to.
I think we just became best friends, to quote.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to ask you a couple other things on one. I want to ask about your podcast, but I want to go back because I'm about to finish War for Late Night again for maybe the 6th or 7th time.
Yep.
And it's something that I've thought a lot about. Now, I've had the privilege of interviewing Jay Leno once. Now, it was for his car show, and it was one of those press tour in the morning thing. So I didn't really get in deep at all with him about things, but it was great to talk to Leno, and I've talked to Fallon as well. And it was really cool to talk to those guys. But I do feel though that Jay is a misunderstood person in this whole late show world. I understand the criticism he's gotten, but at the same time, I sometimes sympathize with Jay in the sense of, hey, like they offered this to me and I said yes. And that's, to me, now, you can go back to the Helen Kushnick, and I know she's since passed, and we should not speak too ill of those who are no longer here. But a lot of the flubs that Jay had early on, not acknowledging Carson in his first show, the bad stories out there were her influence on him. Now, he's his own man. Could he have done it? Sure. But at the same time, Jay seems like from a generation that my parents are from, of this is what the boss asks, this is what I do. The boss said so. The company asked me to do it, so I do it. And when you think about Jay's upbringing, to Scottish parents and his mother, or his mother being Scottish and an immigrant, his father being a hardworking Italian in Boston, the way he came up, I understand his viewpoints. I understand what he thought. And I think more so than the late shift era, the stuff with Conan, the bad rep he got with that one, to me, bothers me. I get the Dave one, and I understand. Dave, honestly, if I'm looking at it objectively, Dave should have gotten the Tonight Show. He should have. He was Johnny's choice. He was the heir apparent. He followed him. Oh, can he play at 11:30? Yes, he's David Letterman. He can absolutely play at 11:35 or whatever the time was when Jay took over.
And it probably wouldn't have taken much politicking, as you said, to make that case, but he never made that case.
But he never made the case for himself. And Dave's a bit more of, especially at that time, anti-establishment in certain ways, to where it's like, and that's kind of where he made his bones is being anti-establishment. But so to go to Jay and the Conan thing, I have a hard time blaming Jay for anything that transpired, honestly. Honestly, when I look at it and what Bill Carter's books, and anybody who's listening to this, first of all, God bless you for listening to nerd out about late night television. But if you listen to the Carter books, or read them, excuse me, he does a very great job of being very fair, I think, especially in late shift. And then the War for Late Night I actually prefer over the late shift because of the way it's written incredibly.
It's so much bigger. It's so much
bigger. There's so many more players, so much more moving pieces. You talk about Kimmel and Colbert and Stewart and Conan and everybody and Dave. But when you think about it, okay, Jay's number one. Now I know you made reference to earlier that is something that he's very proud of, and he should be. I mean, it is the Tonight Show, it is NBC. There are more the lineup and all the things, right? But Jay had to find a way to work that show back to number one after he was getting slaughtered for those 18 months by Dave in the Late Show, and then he had the Hugh Grant moment, blows up, and he's number one, and he keeps it for number one. Yep. It would be a bitter pill to swallow if somebody comes to you and says, in 5 years, we're going to ask you to step down. 5 years in the realm of any kind of business, but especially entertainment, is an eternity that you do not know what's going to happen in those 5 years. And so they come to Jay, you're number one. We have no complaints. We have no complaints about you. We just don't want to lose Conan, which I get, eye on the prize. And so when you think about the 5-year plan, and I've thought a lot about it over the last several years, especially in these last couple of weeks when I knew you and I were going to talk. I understand why they did the 5-year plan. It made a lot of sense for a lineage, to want to make sure you bring late night into the future, things of that nature. It made sense. But I don't like the rep that Jay gets from it, because he was asked to leave the Tonight Show when it was number one. He said, okay, we want to keep you with the network. Okay. We got to, and Jay, and I truly believe, thinks a lot about his staff, and he wants to make sure the staff got paid.
Absolutely.
And everybody. He's always big on his staff.
Absolutely.
And he says, okay, we're going to get another show. We're going to figure it out. They do the 10 o'clock thing. It does not work. And I'm a Jay fan. I did not like the Jay Leno show.
No,
it just did not play the same way his Tonight Show did. And it felt like a hollowed out version of the Tonight Show, and not the Jay Leno show that it could have been. I mean, and not even the Jay Leno show that was a pilot for NBC back in the day in the 80s, right? There was going to be like one of the Saturday Night Live fill-in shows, like Saturday Night
where David Letterman is killed in the first scene. Yeah.
So not even that. But so then they say, well, and this is what I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Then they say, okay, let's move you back to 11:35. We're going to give you a half hour, and then we're going to push Conan back to 12:05. Where people, I think, get the story wrong is they're like, well, Jay was a weak lead-in for Conan. And yes, the 10 o'clock primetime numbers were not good, and that couldn't have helped Conan at all. However, Conan was already slipping the number two before that. But he was losing to Dave. And you know what? Almost rightfully so. Dave really saw that as an opportunity to, hey, let's go in and
to ramp up.
Let's ramp up. And they did a great job, and he was doing great shows, and Conan slips. So to me, if Conan O'Brien, turned down the Fox deal and turned down this deal and that deal because he wanted to ascend to the Tonight Show the same way Dave did. He gets the show in an age where we were leaning more towards the internet, and people were watching the shows later and on digital and on YouTube and DVR. Did the 12:05 really make that big of a difference to just pack it up and leave? I just don't see that being the case. I don't know. That's the one that I have trouble justifying Conan, and I love Conan O'Brien. I actually want to make that known. I think Conan, incredible. Can you have picked a better success for David Letterman at late night? No. I mean, it was the perfect choice. But okay, what do you think of the 12:05 move and the People of Earth manifesto and the way that went down?
Yeah, I mean, and it was fascinating. And I mean, there's so many. What you brought up there, we could go 2 hours on just this one subject.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try and bullet point it as much as I possibly can. There's
maybe we should have a longer conversation about it someday. But let me get
Can't wait. Let's do it. No. And let's do it. This is my sweet spot in life right now, what we're doing here. So Leno's a company guy. He's a hard worker. The work ethic is through the roof. There's no doubting that. I don't think anybody, part of the reason why they chose Jay over Dave was because Jay would do anything the company wanted him to do.
Company man.
Whereas as you pointed out earlier, Dave was a little more anti-establishment. People like yes men, especially when you think about the Tonight Show, which is one of the most powerful franchises on television.
Well, you want someone you can trust. You want someone you can trust. Yeah.
NBC's like, we're getting it back from Carson Productions. We want a guy we can trust. We want a guy who's going to you need to go to the Ohio affiliate on the weekend because you got to smooth something over. Jay would do it in a second. No problem. Like Jay's that guy. Okay. We want somebody that we can work with. I don't think they suspected they were getting Helen Kushnick, but Jay himself, top shelf when it comes to that. His work ethic through the roof, do whatever it takes. So he's got that. He does have this loyalty to his staff. No question about that. To the point, and a company man to the point, let's try something that's never been tried before. This 10 o'clock thing, the marketing on that was insane. He's on the cover of Time magazine. He's going to change television. He's going to dilute television. He's going to get rid of an entire block of the necessary primetime shows that are necessary and make the cheapest hour of primetime television ever and rearrange things. Okay. I think he gave it everything he had with the restraints that he had. I think he did.
And he did have considerable restraints. Yeah. Yeah.
Tons of them. Like they hamstrung that show. So, and he's got ambition. He's a hard worker. Well, show me a hard worker that doesn't have some sort of ambition, even if that ambition is a job well done. It's not saying that they want the boss's job necessarily, but when somebody has that dedication to a craft, that comes with an inherent ambition that you want to work. And if the choice of to work or to not work shows up, you're going to do whatever you can to work. And this is where I think, like, I love Craig Ferguson and how Craig Ferguson was immune to any of the politics that happened whatsoever. Yeah. And he would have Jay on his show. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
But now let's flip the coin to the other side a little bit. Okay. When this was all happening, was Jay in negotiations with ABC and trying to smooth things over with Jimmy Kimmel to say, hey, I'll come over. I'll be your lead-in. We'll do this sort of thing. Okay.
That did happen.
That did happen. Instead, he chose to stay and do. He could have walked. And this is Dave's point. You're not being treated fairly, whatever. You're they're going another direction. Fine. You go walk and you make them eat their lunch or eat their words or whatever. And to me, that ambition bled over to a place where some of the things and some of the justifications, when he came out and talked about Conan's ratings, as it was happening real time, I took exception to it every single time.
I understand that.
Because, when Dave was having you for the first time in history, the Tonight Show not being number one in that spot, would you have liked them to cut and run? Or would you have liked them to give time to figure it out? Then, if you look at the quality of Conan's Tonight Shows, I loved Conan's Tonight Shows. I wish a box set would come out. I would be the first one to buy it, and I'd buy the special edition of it. Conan's Tonight Shows were awesome. And imagine if they were given another 18 months to figure out, without pressure, to figure it out. And I mean, you look at Conan's TBS, like my favorite late night run in history is watching Letterman, O'Brien on TBS, and Craig Ferguson. Yeah. I would watch those shows every day, and I couldn't watch them in real time because they bled into each other. So I'd have to DVR one, and I would choose which. Letterman was obviously kind of real time, and then Ferguson and O'Brien. It would just depend on the shows or whatever. But I would watch those shows every single day. To me, that is like my sweet spot, golden age of late night TV is those three, with other honorable mentions, of course, throughout history. I mean, if I had to nail it down to one, that'd be it. Conan's Tonight Show was incredible, and for Leno to kind of throw out the ratings thing and the number one, how important it was when he himself was given grace in that same scenario. To me, I thought I took exception every time he said it. Like there was just a part of me inside that was like, oh, well, okay. You didn't have to say that. Like his contract was expertly expertly created. It was a pay and play,
Right.
where he was guaranteed to be on the air. And I mean, the contract that he had, NBC was in a tough spot because they wanted to keep him so bad that they probably signed a contract they shouldn't have signed. They should have probably had some more options, so they could have backed their horse entirely and completely with Conan. Dave was right in the sense where he knew it would all work out. He knew it would work out for Conan, and it would, because he's a giant. Conan is phenomenal.
Love Conan.
But so with Jay, I think there are two sides to that coin that both have a legitimate picture on them. And I can see why. I could see why Jimmy Kimmel would be mad at Jay Leno. I could see why Jimmy did what he did, and he kind of gave him his receipt for that when he appeared on Leno's show. That is one of the greatest segments I've ever seen on a show, when Jimmy Kimmel in real time. And I give all credit to Jay Leno for airing that. He didn't have to air that.
It took a set, man, to air it. Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm going way deeper. I'm sorry that there's no context for the listener here or whatever. No. But I do believe that there are people who would look at how Jay Leno acted or things that said to them at that point and go, yeah.
But here, let me ask you this though: 30 minutes. Okay, look, Jay's going to be on the air for, I think they guaranteed him 2 years, I believe is what it was.
Yeah.
So okay, he's already done 7 months or whatever. So you have another year and a half, let's say,
of this 1205 show.
Say again.
Of this 1205 show, potentially.
Of a 1205. Yeah. So so you have another year and a half of Jay doing a half hour before you.
Yeah.
If nothing else, you get a good monologue and maybe a headlines, and you lead into Conan for a year and a half to kind of find your footing, establish yourself, and then Jay would eventually, hopefully, at that point, ride off into the sunset, like he did just a couple years after he took this Tonight Show back.
Yep, and then it would normalize.
And then it would normalize, and I think Conan. I'm not saying I don't get Conan's decision. Because he felt like he was being railroaded, and in a lot of ways he was, and he was being forced to make a decision that again, different from Jay, who had an expertly negotiated contract, I guess, by himself and his lawyer. Conan not having that time period protection. For people who don't know, Jay's Tonight Show contract said the Tonight Show is a show that is between 11:35 and 12:35 every Monday through Friday. Conan's just said the Tonight Show, no time period, protection. And that is really, I think, what came to bite him in the rear as well, was his contract, because he lusted over that show, which, Mike, if either one of us, if NBC called us right now and said, hey, in 5 years, we're going to give you the Tonight Show, we would sign whatever document was in front of. Yeah, here you go. Let me sign it right now.
Oh, you the pinky finger? Yeah, the pinky finger. Yeah, okay, go and take that.
Okay,
we get a cleaver? Cool. Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
We'll do it.
Yeah.
So I get that from Conan's perspective. He just wanted it so bad. Yeah. I do, in some ways, wish he would have held on and then seen what his Tonight Show could have grown into. Yeah. But at the same time, hindsight being 2020, everything worked out the way it was really supposed to.
Well, it is.
Other than, man, we really do need to do a part two, because other than what happened with George Lopez, because I do think there's some interesting things there that should be discussed more that doesn't get talked about.
Yep.
But I do think everything worked out the way it was supposed to. And Jimmy Fallon, being the host of Tonight Show now, is the right guy to host the show. Okay, two things, Mike, before, and then we will have to wrap, because I am going against my own time now.
Yeah, no problem.
But two things. One, and you can give me a shorter answer on this, of Stephen Colbert ascending to the Late Show. When you heard he was going to be the man to replace Dave in that franchise that Dave created, was that a choice you were happy with? Were you nervous about it? And he had his own tumultuous start, but has found his footing post the 2016 election. But what did you think of Stephen Colbert?
I thought it was a good choice. Thought it was a safe choice. I thought it was an intriguing choice for sure. Good, because Colbert is an incredible talent. He's amazing, and in so many ways, and has a similar sensibility in the sense of comedic, but also, I mean, I know he's an actor. I get that. So if he's not a broadcaster, he has done a really, really good job of playing the role of a broadcaster, if that's the case. And maybe that is a difference that is worth going down the path of. But that being said, he has a sensibility where he could come off as a broadcaster, as well as a tremendous, multi-talented comedic force in so many ways. So I thought he was a safe choice in many respects. Intriguing in the fact that, of course, he had played a character for almost a decade or whatever it was on the Colbert Report, and okay, so what's the real Stephen Colbert going to look like? You're not sure at that point what it's going to be. And so, safe, intriguing, all of that stuff. I watched immediately, and it was almost, in hindsight, knowing that he's okay now and everything's fine. It was almost, looking back, it's almost fun to watch him find his footing. It was fun to watch him, experiment on some things. There's a moment on that show I thought that was incredible. We can go into that another time, but anyway, yeah, I thought Stephen Colbert was a safe choice. I love Letterman's response to it, edifying Steve, but also saying, could we have diversified things a little bit, which I think Dave does not get enough credit for that. He does not get enough credit for the women that he had on his staff and the diversity that he had for the time, because we're looking at it through this lens of 2024. But back in the day, like, Dave is extremely thoughtful when it comes to things like that. And the fact that he would throw out there that in one of the most highest esteemed moments in late night, let's throw some diversity out there. I thought that was a thoughtful thing to say, with no discredit to Stephen at all, because he edified Stephen. Mm-hmm. So anyway, those were the thoughts that went through my head when that announcement was made, and I've enjoyed Stephen there.
And this might be a longer answer, which we can explore again. But you are the host of the Letterman podcast, which I have started listening to. That's how I found you. I was going down a late night rabbit hole. I saw, wait a minute, there's a Letterman podcast. Let me lean into this. And I saw,
I get that a lot.
I mean, look, again, 2 interviews with Bill Carter is enough for me to want to listen. But Paul Schaefer's been on the show. We talked about Mr. Dick Cavett. Being able to talk to him. What was the impetus to start the Letterman podcast? And it might be similar to me, and I'll just share this briefly. Yeah, it was over a decade ago. It feels like, or maybe around a decade ago. It was a podcast boom. I wanted to listen to somebody talk about Back to the Future, so I went to the Apple store to go find it. Nobody had a Back to the Future podcast. And I said, "Damn, I wish there was one." And I said, "Well, what if I did it?" And then I did the Back to the Future podcast, and then all these years later, I'm still doing it. You're laughing. I'm wondering if it's a similar story.
Yeah, imposter syndrome has plagued me. When you can defeat imposter syndrome, and don't get me wrong, by saying I defeat it doesn't mean that I'm any good at this. It just means that I'm stumbling forward, chasing a dream. And why me? Why not me? And there's a lot of that in my DNA at this moment, especially, where things are at. The Letterman podcast has a lot of lily pads. They go all the way back, and I mean, there wasn't one. And I was always, I'll tell you this, I'm a podcast fan, huge podcast fan, kind of like you with Back to the Future. I was always waiting for the Letterman podcast. And as I became kind of friends with some of the people who worked for the show, online is how I met them, and would build a rapport with some of these people. Some of the questions I would ask and whatnot, every once in a while, someone of them would say, these are important questions, because the thing about Dave's company, Worldwide Pants, Dave's company, they would never, they're so self-deprecating and in so many ways humble, and eccentric is probably another good word for it. They would never put out a podcast because it would come out, in my opinion, because it would be self-aggrandizing.
Right.
Even though what they did was important. Our tagline for the show is a celebration of the greatest body of broadcast work in history, that of David Letterman and Company. I fully believe that. There are a lot of long-term members, multi-decade members of the staff who believe that, but would never say it out loud and would never certainly host a show that goes through those amazing moments that were created, like diamonds being mined and found and cast aside, never to be talked to again, because there's another show tomorrow night and we got to keep mining. And it's like this content that exists. I mean, what a perfect podcast. Let's have the Letterman podcast. We talk to people who guested on the show. We talk to people who obviously who worked for the show and created the show in all of its different incarnations. And we talk to people who the show affected, whether it be a fan, whether it be someone who was the victim of a Letterman prank of some sort, whether it be, performers, people on stupid human tricks and all that kind of stuff. It's literally endless. Never mind the list of celebrities who wish that they could have gone, sat in the chair and told Dave how much they loved him, but were forbode to do so. Those celebrities sometimes are the greatest moment that they ever had in their career is being on Letterman. So we provide a venue for them to talk about it. Well, their company would never, ever, they would never do that. They would just never put that out there. It's not their style. It's not their sensibility. And so I just thought, well, okay. And that's when I talked to Shecky about it. I would never have done it if I didn't have the blessing of one of the people. And Shecky was there 32 years. I asked him to be my Tom Hagen. You know, if it's a Godfather reference, my consigliere. Yeah. I said, I want to do this. This show needs to exist. As a podcast fan, I would listen to this show every week. For those who feel the same way about Letterman, but you're stuck with me as a host, I apologize. I'm sorry. All right. I'm trying to get better at it. But anyway, it needed to happen, and it never did happen. And a series of events occurred that kicked me over the edge to decide to do it. And it's one of the greatest decisions I've ever made. We're about to celebrate our 2-year anniversary. We've got 120 shows in the can, and a lineup of people who are coming out. Actually, it's funny. 3 guests that I'm about to record with are all old school late night people. And I want to ask them a lot about, I love when the old school late night people are on, because I can ask them Andy Kaufman stories. And yes. So I'm pretty excited about some of the ones that I'm going to record with, and I'm not going to talk about right now. But tomorrow, Al Chez comes out. He was the trumpet player for Paul Schaefer's band for forever. And you listen to this guy's stories. His stories have stories. I mean, it's endless. And we can celebrate this thing together. It comes out weekly on Fridays. The Letterman podcast, you can find it on YouTube, all the podcast platforms. I thank you for giving me the ability to talk about it a little bit here. And one day we can go through the origin story a little bit more, because there's probably 3 dozen lily pads that if one of those lily pads doesn't exist, the show doesn't exist. And it goes all the way back to a moment I had with Dave on stage. I mean, back in 2005, where we bantered back and forth, and the moment got captured and put in the New York Times. It's like one of the greatest moments of my life. And imagine having one of the greatest moments of your life, a New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, capture the moment. I had that happen. And to me, it's either blissful ignorance or serendipity, one or the other, that I'd be the guy to do this. And I fought through a lot of imposter syndrome because I certainly don't feel worthy being the guy. And maybe that's a characteristic that the guy who hosts the show needs to have. I don't know. Anyway, so there's.
I think you and Dave are more alike than probably you realize, and your abilities as a storyteller and a broadcaster come through in your podcast and came through in this interview. And I appreciate you making the time for me. And this is going to be, I'm sure, the first of many. I mean, we hit the 90-minute mark in our first conversation, and we didn't even scratch really.
No.
Anything. We
no
got
pre-interview, folks. No pre-interview. We didn't get to pro wrestling. We didn't get to anything. Brad, seriously, we can talk off camera about this. There's something here we should probably talk about. We should talk about something. I think we could do something regular, and never run out of things to talk about. This has been a blast, and you're awesome too. Like, I mean, I love what you're doing. And again, the fisherman always recognizes another fisherman. Let's keep chasing them dreams.
Let's do it. Well, Mike, the Letterman podcast drops Fridays, and I really appreciate you taking the time, man.
I can't reciprocate my appreciation as well enough. It's amazing. Thank you.